everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Bob Batelson. I'm team leader for Global Consulting Services at Sophion. Today's webinar is not about us or our Accolade software. It's about our businesses are operating and adjusting to the new normal in the face of the coronavirus pandemic. As we all navigate what is really an unprecedented environment, we are seeing industries being impacted differently. Some are seeing a huge surge in demand and others quite the opposite. To quote one of our panelists today, Jeff George, there is simply no playbook for this. So we brought together a panel representing a range of company sizes and industries so we can hear a variety of different experiences, learnings, and perspectives. As I introduce our panel members, if you would, please give a wave or a nod. Jeff George is Senior Vice President of R&D at Hain Celestial Group. Hain Celestial is a leading organic and natural consumer products company with operations in North America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Jeff plays a critical role in Hain's effort to undergo a strategic shift to simplify its portfolio, strengthen innovation capabilities, restore top-line growth, and expand margins and cash flow. Prior to joining Hain, Jeff served as Vice President of R&D for Campbell's America and Hillshire Brands. Scott Kirsner is the CEO and co-founder of Innovation Leader, an information service for corporate innovation executives in the United States, and a longtime columnist for the Boston Globe. Innovation Leader helps some of the world's largest companies build their competitive advantage, providing useful guidance, best practices, case studies, tactics, and strategies aimed to help innovation, strategy, and R&D professionals strengthen their corporate innovation programs. Steve Moskowitz is in the Innovation Management and Digital Innovation Office of the CTO at Entegris. Integris' mission is to deliver innovative, science-based solutions to help customers in the most advanced industries improve their performance and transform the world. He has been with Integris since 2014, where he has primarily been focused on driving the process of innovation management. He is currently leading Integris' approach to digital innovation. Dr. Cemil Inan has been working for Arçelik Group for over 28 years, where he has served as head of R&D, global director of refrigerator product, and currently director of global product management. Arçelik, which is headquartered in Turkey, is a multinational leader in domestic appliances with 13 product lines and well-known brands including Vico and Grundig. Today's panel is being moderated by Sophion CEO Andy Michuda. Andy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks for the wave back there, Scott. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Bob. And I'd like to welcome everybody to today's session. We're living through a time when world health and well-being is front of mind for all of us. In total consuming, rightfully so. But today, for this moment, for the next hour, we're going to turn our attention to the effect that the COVID-19 has had on our companies, our businesses around the world. If there's one thing that I've heard over and over is that the COVID-19 has affected digital transformation, not the CTO or CEO of the corporate enterprise. And so people who've been doing surveys and where are you at with digital transformation, it's interesting that in effect, the COVID-19 has had more responsibility for companies changing and modifying how they conduct business. And we're here today to talk about that. I'm very thankful for the wealth of knowledge and experience with us today on our session. I also, as Bob stated, the variety of industries that are represented by our panel members, it provides a very rich picture of how different industries are affected by the pandemic. And at the core of all of us is the shared interest and passion for innovation. And so with that, let's dive in with the first question that we have for our panelists. The first question I have for you is, now that your companies have shifted to accommodate for a new working environment, whether that is work from home, or I know some of you have been deemed essential businesses, and therefore applying work shifts and social distance policies in your work environment. What's working and what isn't? And what's the biggest challenge you face in this new way of working? Jeff, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you and talk to us about Hain Celestial in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And good morning, everyone. Looking forward to a lively panel discussion today during these really unique and challenging times. Hain is in a position of being a critical supplier. So we're a healthy food, beverage, and personal care products company. So the demand for our products has been extraordinary. And the pressure it's placed on our way of working has also been extraordinary for us. Candidly, we were behind. We were not a great remote working company. A lot of business was done face-to-face, and it was out of sight, out of mind. And that had to change overnight. Thankfully, it did, in that we were able to upgrade our IT tools, including using MS Teams, which has worked quite well for us. And we went to a culture where we did not work well remotely to one where we're working exceptionally well. I'm surprised it's actually bringing teams together more than I thought, because we're in communication constantly, and we're able to see each other using webcams and the technology. So one thing that's working that's surprising is how rapidly we were able to pivot to be a much more effective work remote company. I think one thing that isn't working that we still struggle with when it comes to innovation. So a lot of our innovation is done with partners. A lot of our innovation is done at our manufacturing facilities and at our co-manufacturing partners. It requires ingredients, it requires materials, it requires our folks to travel to do that work, and it requires consumers for us to test our products on. All of those things have become challenging. Scarcity of facility available, scarcity of supply. So it's required us to come up with a lot of really creative solutions to find ways to continue to advance innovation projects during a period where there are so many barriers to being able to do that. So it's a challenge we fight and we work on every day.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Cemil, you come to us from Turkey here. Why don't you share with us how the pandemic is affecting the work environment of your company?
Sure, it is affecting a lot, of course. As Jeff mentioned, I would never guess that everyone in the company in one day can go digital easily. Under these very specific conditions, I observed all of the people in the company had mindset shift from the daily work to the digital daily work era. The challenge is not this one, actually. Everybody get adjusted with this one, but the factories in my company are still going on because we are producing home appliances and people needed them even in they stuck at home. And beyond that, we need to provide after-sales service to the people who need it immediately to keep their life easier at home. Therefore, there are different dynamics in the company. Some works at home, some works from the field, some works in the production line. Alignment of all of these groups are the challenging part for our company. We had a chance, actually not a chance, but we had a good lesson learned from China. We have a production plant in China. And then since they had this epidemic or pandemic issues earlier than the world, we had a very good lessons learned from that factories and working conditions. So we applied immediately before the Western world, immediately into our daily business to keep going on. And therefore, I can say that the going digital was not the difficult part, but the alignment of the people with different daily life was the challenging part for all of us. Beyond that, I also observed that the generation Y, the young workers, they were adjusted themselves more easily than the others, experienced workers. This is not because of the age issue, because of the responsibility issue actually. At home, the youngsters adjusted themselves, but the others, the families, kids, elderly people all together, you know, they needed some time to adjust themselves. The logistics at home was not easy for most of the people. Even they didn't have a comfortable chair to sit all day for the video conferences. And maybe after these COVID issues, the architects needs to change their way of designing houses for new era.
Thank you for that, Cemil. I must admit, I too changed out my chair at home as a result of this, admittedly so. Steve, let's go over to you. You come to us from Upper New York, and I have to acknowledge for the audience, Steve's wife is a nurse. She's very much at the front line, and her hospital is supporting our coronavirus patients. And Steve, I want to thank you upon everybody else for all the frontline support and the sacrifice you and your family have given in support of others. So thank you for that, Steve. Let's go on. Talk to us about Integris.
Sure. So Integris, and thank you for the kind words there. I'll pass them on to my wife and her coworkers. So Integris, as Cemil said, we also have facilities in China, and so we had early indicators of what was going to be happening with the pandemic. We were able to, quickly respond not only through Asia, but as it expanded to the U.S., putting in place, work from home, split shifts, putting in, advanced safety within our factories. So that part was relatively straightforward. From an innovation perspective, since we're part of the semiconductor and life sciences world, we are considered essential. And so we had to keep our laboratories up and running, not just manufacturing, but laboratories. And so figuring out that balance for essential workers on the R&D side was definitely a challenge. As somebody said earlier, making sure you have the social distancing in the laboratory. So not having 3 or 4 people in the lab together, but maybe one at a time. So a couple of things that we did learn, as Jeff said earlier, we've been using Microsoft Teams and WebEx for a while. What we found, though, was we were using it really for basic communications. We weren't really leveraging, for example, the video, because most folks would be, on the WebEx, but they're doing multitasking, they're doing other things, and so we weren't using video. We've quickly seen people adopt video, a lot more face-to-face interaction that way. The other thing is the chat room. So during the conference, I have the chat on the side here. People can post questions. We're finding people using that a lot more than we ever did before, and it really replaces those side conversations that seem to happen in meetings. So even though we're using the same tools we've used for a while, it's those additional features that we keep finding that add benefit. The other thing we're doing specifically for kind of a digital transformation aspect is a lot of our facilities, we might have R&D in the US and manufacturing in Taiwan or Korea. As we introduce new technology and new products, normally folks would go over and travel and help introduce that product. So we're starting to introduce things like some augmented reality tools, a product from PTC called Vuforia Chalk, which allows essentially face-to-face interaction where you can draw on the screen and really, circle where you have questions and concerns. And so we're really trying to find tools like that we maybe were piloting slowly before, and we've accelerated the introduction of those tools in response to this. So I think that's been the biggest challenge, or the biggest change, is finding those new tools and not having huge new capabilities, but looking for little things to find individual problems and help solve those problems.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Scott, you have conducted webinars like this, your outreach to your membership, all innovation professionals out there. What additional do you see to add to the change in the workplace today that you're hearing from companies?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what more dramatic changes could we have seen in our life than we have seen in the last month, right? It's like home life and work life are colliding. Everybody's priorities are changing. We're living, in Google Hangouts or Microsoft Teams or Zoom and trying to figure out, how do you innovate? How do you collaborate in this new environment? I guess like 3 things I would highlight that we're noticing are, one, you need to make sure that you have a way for people to have fun and stay connected with each other, and for us, that has meant like occasionally in our team meetings, we might set up a trivia game or a contest using a tool like Poll Everywhere or Kahoot, which have these kind of fun leaderboards. And we've done stuff. We just did the newlywed game, like how much do you know about your coworkers in a meeting yesterday? So I think like fun and just making sure you're making space for all of us to be human beings as opposed to just get stuff done. That's one really important thing. I think everybody right now is trying to figure out, as Cemil and Jeff were alluding to, how do you keep your existing operations going in this new context, and who needs to pitch in on that, right? So that's sort of the operational continuity that is job one for us and for every other company. I should say, like, we don't actually make a physical product. We're an information and conference company. We bring corporate innovators together and help spread around information. And the third thing is like, well, what new stuff can you be doing? There are opportunities that are being created, and I hope we'll talk more about this, but in this new economic context, this new life context, what are the opportunities that you can see to do some new stuff and maybe stop doing some of the old stuff that is suddenly less relevant to people?
Yeah, great point, Scott. We're going to come on to that with another question. Thank you. Let's go on to a change in theme here. Industry experts are currently suggesting that COVID-19 is going to be affecting all of us anywhere from 3 months to 24 months. The only consensus that I think we all have is we don't, in fact, know. And we do know it'll vary geographically around the world. People are going to be affected at different points in time. So my question to you, panel members, is how are you going about prioritizing your business activities, your portfolios, with such an unknown environmental factor in front of us? Jeff, how is Hain Celestial dealing with this regarding your innovation portfolio prioritizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the $1 million question for us, and I think there's some things we have confidence in that, at least in the near term, are going to change dramatically. Other things we're less sure, so we're trying to plan for provision. So as an example, when it comes to our consumers, those that are eating our food and using our personal care products, the need for safety, the need for security, the need to feel calm, the desire to have benefits like immunity to protect them from their now what is a much more scary environment. It's pretty clear those types of products and those types of benefits that we can provide are in very high demand today and are going to continue after the worst of this crisis is over. There's other things, though, like consumer purchasing behavior. So we've seen an exceptional shift of consumers, especially in food, now buying online, ordering online to be delivered, ordering online to be pickup, ordering takeout food, significant meal occasions moving to home from restaurants and other places that are no longer available. So the shift has been wholesale. And there's one school of thought that as soon as the worst of this crisis is over, everything's going to go back to the way it was before. There's another school of thought that, hey, there's a lot of consumers that have never used these online services. They've never used this at home. And they're also building some skills around cooking and taking care of themselves at home. They're going to keep doing that, especially as we're entering what's most likely a recessionary environment. So some say it's going to go exactly the back way it was. Others say it's going to change dramatically. The truth is probably in between. I think it's probably not going to stay at either end of the spectrum, but where it lands, to what degree consumers return to their previous behavior versus to what degree they adopt these new behaviors is critically important for a company like ours in the innovation that we do and the products we provide and the way we take those products and reach them to the consumer. So our team is spending a lot of time. I mean, our number one focuses are the safety of our employees and business continuity, keeping in business so we can supply these critical products. But we're also trying to carve out a share of our minds to think about what the world is going to look like in the future. Those areas where we have some confidence, where we know what it's going to be, and other areas we don't. So we have to plan for different contingencies.
Yeah, super.
Real quick, Andy, and say two things to build off what Jeff said. Like, one is these digital transformation efforts. You mentioned them, Andy, in your introduction. Like digital transformation efforts that have this like 12 or 24-month time frame, and they include the kitchen sink and everything you could possibly digitize. You know, those things are going to get massively accelerated, or pieces of those are going to get massively accelerated, because companies that we talk to realize that if certain things are not digitized, in Q2, they're going to be really hurting in Q3 and Q4. And it's a lot of processes that still happen on carbon paper and with signatures, or things that happen with two people sitting across a table and, a salesperson visiting a prospect. Those things, key elements, are going to get digitized faster. The companies are just going to really suffer. And the second thing that I would say is direct to consumer. It's something that every company talks about. Companies that have resellers and franchisees and distributors, and they really have wanted to go direct to consumer, but the existing relationships often prevented it. And I think you're going to see a lot of activity of companies looking at how do we get, whether you're a consumer products company or financial services, all kinds of companies figuring out how do you get something directly into that consumer's hands, because our distributor network, our reseller network is kind of falling apart, just not able to do it in this new context.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Cemil, you're a consumer products company, right? Consumer goods products company. So that consumer demand, that shift that Jeff is talking about, has one effect in the food area, but you're in the appliance area, refrigeration, stuff like that. How are you dealing with these factors? And when Scott talks about accelerating certain things that are absolutely critical on a go forward, how does your company view this effect to your business, given that you're so dependent on consumer shift, and we don't know where the consumers are going to shift or when?
Yeah, actually, let me say the first important issue, that the #1 priority in the company is the health and safety of the people. We are putting this on top of everything. Just after this, it comes job security. It is the part of also health to keep our people in the business. Then keep going on the business side becomes our daily issue to work on it. As Scott and Jeff mentioned, I think the connected appliances, which will serve people, will be an important issue, and acceleration on this area we can expect. Connectivity, because we are investing a lot for maybe almost 10 years. Every company puts their efforts to keep the products connected, but until now, unfortunately and honestly, we couldn't propose a real customer value out of these connectivity issues. Now it becomes an opportunity and a real need to, for example, let me give you a live example for that. The refrigerator is a vital at home, and then without refrigerator, food safety is not possible. However, if the refrigerator breaks down, if there is anything wrong with the refrigerator, people need help immediately, maybe from the distant locations, not coming to home because they don't want you to go there. Therefore, this creates a new era or new area to work on for R&Ds. First, to help consumers through connectivity abroad. Second, teach or educate users to fix themselves. That kind of things becomes a real need, and then therefore I expect big acceleration on that area to attack. In my company, beside all that, we apply some rules on prioritization. #1, I already told, that is people's safety and health. Beyond that, urgent issues, mandatory issues, and nice to have. We put these 3 categories to make the decision accordingly. It helped a lot because the urgent issues are the vital issues and change daily. There is no strict prioritization on these urgent issues. 2 days is already too late, too old, let me say. So agile teamwork is applied on this section.
Yeah. Thank you, Cemil. Steve, you represent a different industry, high tech. Your very sophisticated chips are bringing intelligence, a lot of the smart stuff that people like Cemil's company rely on. How do you folks prioritize on a go-forward basis, given the situation that you're faced with and the unknown?
So let me just go back in history a little bit. About 5 years ago or so, we would mainly focus on advanced logic as our key customer, right? The leading processors of the world. We started to see this shift with digital transformation, as Scott was talking about, as Jeff and Cemil talked about, and the need for mainstream logic. A lot of the sensors are older technology, but are still required. A lot of the advances in the extremes of data, so a lot more memory applications. And so we started making a shift over the last 3 to 4 years to not just focus on advanced logic, but to have a more distributed focus on other parts of the semiconductor technology ecosystem. And that's been really good for us. What we're seeing now is the need to then reevaluate, as folks were talking about, as the more companies are moving into the need for digital transformation sooner. That's going to drive a shift in our end customers, their demands and what they're seeing. So we're going to respond accordingly. What we do on a regular basis is go through and look at our portfolio, and we're actually doing that over the next couple of weeks to see where our priorities are. The biggest challenge we're seeing is, even though we're staffing our factories, it's not fully staffed. There's some work from home. There's some balance you have to make, and so we can't do everything. And so trying to prioritize and what are the most important things to do given the demands out there is really critical. The final thing I'll say from an innovation perspective is one thing our CEO has really made clear is, as we get out of this this challenge, he views it as a racer, right? A race car or a ski racer. We're going into this curve. We're slowing down. We're unsure of what's going to happen, but we need to be able to accelerate out of that curve, right? We need to be in a position when we get out of this challenge, out of this crisis, to be able to move quickly. And so that's the other thing we're doing, is making sure our organization is nimble enough and trying to remove those barriers that prevent us from moving quickly. So that way, as we get through this time period, we are able to continue to move quickly with decisions, not just as we manage today, but as we manage tomorrow. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, is both balancing our portfolio for today, but positioning the organization to be more nimble in the future.
Yeah, very hopeful and optimistic view towards the market around the corner. It's a timing challenge on, all right, when is that corner going to hit, so that you're ready to, as you said, race. Thank you, Steve. I'd ask all of you to kind of just step back prior to COVID-19, when companies were very much rushing towards digital transformation. Rush has a different definition and feeling today, certainly. And everybody was aiming to become more flexible, offer more agility, apply self-managed teams. And a number of the customers we work with were searching for the correct balance between the freedom and flexibility of self-managed teams to operate and the responsibility and governance and strategic alignment. These two can really work against each other. And now that we're in this compressed state of unknown that all of you have talked about, the terminology where industries were using agile, safe, or hybrid stage gate, whatever they called it, how do you see your approaches and processes modifying today? So each of you talked about the need to move and accelerate certain things very quickly. That applies to your frontline cross-functional teams, as well as the executive decision-making, the funding, the prioritization. How do you see bringing these two challenges, right, these two aspects of your corporation together to work together on a go-forward basis? Jeff, you've been working on creating a dynamic culture inside your organization. Now, when you put COVID on top of that, how do you address that question?
Yeah, I think we are fortunate in that we are already along the journey of creating a more flexible, agile innovation process and development culture. So part of that is really working, I think, to our advantage through this time. But there's another part that's actually challenging. And I can talk briefly about both of those. So at Hain, we've adopted what we would consider agile innovation process, very much inspired by private equity, venture capital, almost a Shark Tank kind of model. So we have certain businesses that we've designated as growth businesses, get better businesses, get bigger. And the teams there have weekly access to the senior leadership of the company. So we actually, our innovation is not quarterly, it's not monthly. We actually do innovation meetings every single week where these teams and these businesses can come into our senior leaders serving as a Shark Tank type growth board and present their ideas for gate changes, for fast decisions, for funding, and for guidance. And we had that in place already. So the fact that we had a very connected senior leadership team, we had very empowered project teams that were driving their projects forward. When we've gone now to a virtual environment, it actually worked to our advantage. So the need to have more frequent check-ins, the need to have more connectivity across layers, we had it. And so I think we've been able to continue that and leverage that. And it's helped us not only to continue to progress innovation, but also to react effectively to the very dynamic business situation we have with issues around, say, business continuity, for example. So that's really worked to our advantage. One linchpin of agile development is very close connection with consumers, and it's really co-creating and co-developing new products with consumers. So not doing a bunch of work over a course of months and then going to consumers one time for a big test. Instead, we interact with consumers every week, sometimes multiple times per week, working with them to help develop the concepts and products that we develop. Well, access person to person to consumers is no longer possible in this kind of environment. So we've had to pivot, and one change that we've made is, fortunately, we had developed a virtual consumer community. So it's, again, a newish tool for us. It's a community of a couple of thousand consumers that are users, and they're passionately engaged with our brands. So we've been reaching out to them on a regular basis to talk about ideas, to talk about white space opportunities, to share concepts with them. And even over the last couple of weeks, we're figuring out how we can get products sent to their homes so they can actually test them, taste them, give us feedback, and then connect with them the same way we're connecting with you today to hear firsthand what they think about our products. So I think the situation has driven innovative approaches to how we reach out and how we stay connected with consumers, because ultimately that's going to drive the success of our offerings or not. So some things working well and we're able to adapt. Other things we're having to change on the fly based on the constraints that COVID-19 creates.
Access to a virtual consumer community is really enticing. Really fun to learn more about that, Jeff. Cemil, Steve, Scott, who else wants to go next on this question?
So this is Steve. So I'll jump in a little bit. I think from a innovation perspective, we've been pushing, starting to play with Agile a little bit. A lot of our project teams are already distributed, so we haven't seen a huge change there. I think the two big things we're seeing are a shift in our meetings. So gate meetings, team meetings, portfolio meetings, where we would typically have, say, 60 to 70% of the folks in one room and everybody else calling in. When you'd have those meetings, the folks on the phone would pretty much, be second-class citizens, right? They wouldn't always participate fully. They might present, but they wouldn't come in and ask all the questions. And you would really get the meeting dominated by the people in the room. We've seen a nice shift, actually, with everybody being virtual, that it's a much more democratized conversation. Everybody's more engaged. Everybody's more involved. You don't have the one or two people dominating the conversation anymore. And so it's been interesting to see a shift from being in person to everybody being remote and having better teamwork that way, better conversation. So that was a little bit of a surprise for us, but a very positive surprise. One of the challenges will be when we move back to every, 70% of the people being in the room, how do you not lose that conversation and engaging the whole team? The other thing we're starting to do now is look more and more at how do we do more experiments, more work virtually. So really ramping up our modeling and simulation capabilities, doing things, computational chemistries, doing more statistical modeling of process improvements before we actually try them on the line. Looking for things, as I said, when we're doing acceptance testing for a new tool, we can't have the experts fly out to the location. So using virtual and augmented reality tools to be there, virtually in person. So those are some of the things that have been different, is really trying to accelerate the use of those modeling and simulation capabilities, augmented and virtual reality tools to get more engaged when we can't be there in person. So just a few things that we're seeing shift.
Andy, so I dropped off for a minute there, so I'm going to answer a question that you didn't ask, if that's okay. I'm looking at the vases behind Cemil on that credenza there, and I love metaphors, and I feel like we're at this moment where one of the vases has fallen off the credenza, right? And it's broken in pieces. And I feel like this moment when the pieces are on the floor, like this is a moment made for innovators. It's made for R&D people. It's made for people who are always thinking about the future, right? Because you have two options right now, and every company is thinking through these options. Do we try to super glue the pieces together and make it look just like it looked before? Or are we going to make something new? Are you going to take the opportunity and like throw the pieces back in the furnace and like, let's create a new kind of organization? Yeah, we obviously need to solve the operational problems, but like, are we really trying to hold online all the same meetings that we used to hold offline and do, processes and supply chain and all this stuff that was frankly brittle, it had problems, it was too slow, it was not digital enough. So like, I think for innovators, the opportunity is like, let's put the pieces together and make something different, not try to recreate the pretty vase that was there before.
Yeah, there's a thought. So Cemil, you want to respond in your culture, your environment, your business, how do you see going forward with the frontline innovators and then the reality of you have to fund, you need to be organized, there needs to be cadence. How do you feel about breaking the pieces of the vase, and where does it go in the future?
After COVID, I guess, right? You are asking, or just general business?
Well, how you view it in your general business, given the market that you serve?
Let me say, start from Scott about how can we glue the pieces again in a new way, or as it is before. I guess we should act to make it different than before. And in this aspect, I guess in my company, in my culture, agility and agile teams are becoming more and more important. And there is a cultural change in the company. As a global company, we already used to work with different cultures. However, this agility is something different than the quick decision making. It is related with the young generation's needs. They love to be in agile teams, to act fast without asking anyone, and then own the credit together. Therefore, the agility gives these generation Y, or you can call it new generations, and new environment to show themselves in the company. Therefore, it is becoming not only a type of management, but it is a necessity to create new things in the company, because when they own, they act better. We are trying to keep this soul in the company to feed them with the correct insight. What I mean correct insight, because the innovation needs a problem to be solved. And the insight should come from the consumer in our case. We need to listen consumer in a better way, either virtually, either face-to-face, either through how do you say, data analysis, whatever it is, but we need to understand consumer needs. Then everything becomes easier when we set agile teams. There is one thing beside all these agile teams, I also believe in a project discipline in the companies. Making agile, everything agile creates a chaotic environment. Of course, the result is quicker. However, we need a more disciplined base for every innovation stage. So I go for hybrid solutions for a new era.
Yeah, thank you.
Andy, I would, before you jump off, I wanted to just add a comment based on the challenge. I think the healthy challenge that Scott provided, and both Steve and Cemil were talking about it a little bit, about this is a time for innovators, and this is a time for innovation leaders. I think you can fall into this mentality of using this crisis to say, boy, let's just do what we can to get through this, and then when it's over, things will go back to the way they were. To me, that's very unsatisfying. To me, I think this is an opportunity to think differently, as the others were talking about. How can we actually not just go back, but improve the way we do our work and the output of our work? I can think of a couple of examples when it comes to trials for innovation, new products. So if we have a new product idea, we want to go to a manufacturing plant to make it. The way we've typically done it is we have teams of scientists and engineers that fly wherever. They spend several days at the plant making sure everything's done right. Well, we can't do that now because most plants will not allow outside employees in. So what it's forced us to do, we do a much better job at planning. We create robust test plans. We have great communication with the manufacturers, and now they're running those trials on our behalf, gathering the data, sending it back to us, and we evaluate it together. So what that's done, we're actually better at planning than we used to be. We're saving dollars in travel. We're saving hours of travel time for our team. So that's one where, well, when this is over, we're not going to go back to the way we used to do it. Now we have a new, better, improved way of working. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to attempt to do brainstorm sessions. And the thought is, how can you do brainstorming when people are not face-to-face? But if I think about it, brainstorm face-to-face is very effective. But for people who are more introverted, and a lot of our scientists and engineers tend to be more introverted, sometimes it's hard to break through, like Steve was talking about. It's hard to have the voice in the room. So some of these new virtual brainstorm techniques are actually well suited to people who can't always voice their opinions in the room. Instead, they can contribute in a different way. So is it going to be better? I don't know if it'll be better, but it'll be new, it'll be different. It'll be another tool in the toolbox that we can use going forward. So I think it's really incumbent on all of us to think about how to use this, not just to get through it, but how we can actually do our jobs better and produce even better innovation going forward.
Yeah, and it's almost like what I'm hearing is we have a responsibility to take this opportunity to look at it through a different lens, as opposed to the historical lens. Several of you have commented to me in the last question, then we're going to open this up, Bob, for Q&A here in just a minute. But I know several of you have commented, I asked you, what do you see in the new norm? So post-pandemic crisis disruption, what can you see today that you feel will be part of the new norm? And so I know that some of you have very specific examples you shared. Cemil, you had talked about sustainability is going to be different.
Sure.
Talk about that a little bit. Share with the audience your view on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, there is one thing very, very obvious during this COVID conditions, that we did something wrong to the planet. Obviously, that there is an important issue to correct something. During this crisis, we already noticed this issue in my business, especially to produce products in more sustainable way, starting from the material we choose, the energy consumption, water consumption, detergent consumption, something like these issues, or even microfiber elimination during the washing becomes an issue. Therefore, the sustainability from now on will be more important than ever to correct and to go through a better future. Therefore, the sustainability will be a key from now on for every industry to focus.
Very good. Thank you.
The the one thing I would say real quick, Andy, is like, let's not assume that people love this way of living and way of working, and that assume that we're just going to go in a straight line from here on forward. I'm a fan of, getting out of my house sometimes. I'm a fan of restaurants. I'm actually going to appreciate more, man, that first meal where you can go to a restaurant and have a great meal with friends around the table. I'm going to appreciate that 1,000 times more than I appreciated my last meal at a restaurant in March, whenever that was.
Yeah.
So let's not assume that like this hermit in the cave existence that we're living temporarily is the way people are going to want to live. And let's not design everything for, April 2020. I think people like human contact. They like going to football matches. They like, I saw Fenway Park in the background of a webcast yesterday that we were hosting. And I was like, I can't wait to go back to Fenway Park and see some baseball. So don't project out based on what's happening in April 2020.
Yeah.
The other key message I've been getting from you folks is the way your companies are communicating, forced to communicate, given our conditions. Several of you commented you expect the behavior of communication, the cadence, the frequency to continue to operate in a more effective way going forward. Now, Steve, if you're still on, I know you specifically were talking about the frequency of your CEO's communication, the executive team with everybody. Can you talk to that? Just share that with everybody and how you see it post pandemic.
Yes. So again, I apologize for dropping off. We had a sudden storm blow through and lost power for a second and my system shut off. So I'm on my phone. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, you come through clear. Thanks.
Okay, great. So I think one of the things that, as I said earlier, we had early indications of what was happening, and we started with very frequent communications. And our CEO and our executive team was communicating, not just through email but through video, multiple times a week. And what we saw recently, especially over the last 2 weeks, is a shift from updates on safety and updates on the business to more personal updates. One of our last presentations from the CEO, he actually showed, the challenges he has of working at home with 2 college-age daughters, and them on all the internet, and his struggles of getting on meetings with them watching Netflix and other things. We showed examples of one of our factories where we had people who realized that we have a piece of equipment that could make a filter that goes into the N95 mask. And so we had folks working in an extra shift, unpaid overtime, just to make filters because they could do that, and we had the capability. We had other cases where we were able to build up inventory in China early on some PPE, and then quickly get that distributed through the rest of Asia, and now bringing some of that over to the US. So he's been really trying to share more personal stories of what the company's going through, but what individuals are going through as well. And that's been really helpful. We've actually seen, I'll say, a much more positive impact on our company culture through this shift in dialogue and through the shift in communication that's been going on, which is something that I know is going to continue even as we move forward. And the learning from that, I think, is going to be really critical.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. The insight's been great, folks. I think we could go on another couple hours and continue to share and learn. Very much appreciate your contribution to the session and insights provided here today. Bob, it's time to open up for some live Q&A before we end it here at top of the hour.
Can I just add a quick note here for the companies? I think there is a big learning from this issue on the company-wide, that we understood better that we are not responsible from only our business, but we are responsible to all community we serve. Therefore, during that crisis, most of the companies started to have people needed. That is the most important communication and helping to the community. And I think it will continue in future too. My company reserved some R&D forces to produce ventilations for the patients. That is very important and well accepted by the community. I think this will change our future more.
Yeah,
that's a great point. I know from our communication, I think the takeaway is more frequent, less formal. So
Yes.
Our CEO, we used to do quarterly town hall meetings. Our CEO now does weekly town halls from his apartment. You can see his junk in the background. And it really connects with our employees on a much better basis. And like Cemil was saying, the employees really rally around efforts that help the community. We're a hand sanitizer producer in Canada, but we never made that product for the United States. So the team up there and a big team made extraordinary efforts to how we could increase our capacity to find the ingredients, the alcohol, the gelling agent, the packaging, people working overtime. And we actually found a way to make more so we could ship it to the United States to help not only consumers, but our healthcare workers. And something like that is not just right for everyone, but it really rallies employees behind it.
Yeah, great points. Okay, Bob, some Q&As. What do you have?
Sure. I've got a couple of questions. Just as a reminder to our audience, please use the chat box to submit your question if you haven't done so. We are rapidly running out of time. If we don't get to your question, we'll respond to that question online. But let's go ahead and ask a few questions here. To the general panel, we've been talking a lot about the effect that this environmental disruption has had. How many organizations had various scenarios in place in order to be able to respond to disasters like this? And of those that have these plans, were they valuable to you? Could you actually use those to move forward and help you plan ahead for what this disruption is? And then tell us, how do you think those plans are going to change now because of the disruption that we're facing?
Who wants to take that first? Jeff, you're ready. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can chime in. I think we do a risk mitigation effort where we look at major risks to the company across all fronts: financial risk and human risk, and consumers, retail environment. And so we plan and map those out, prioritize those. Something like this was on the list, but I don't know that we were fully prepared for the magnitude of what this has now become. So I think the good thing is that once it became evident that this was going to be a significant impact, led by our CEO, we rallied quickly and put the processes, procedures in place, changed our way of working quickly. So we've been in good position to respond to the very dynamic situation that we're in. So I think planning helped to some degree, but I think it also helped quickly mobilizing, quickly pivoting. I can speak to the innovation R&D. Almost overnight, we changed from having a very balanced long-term innovation to short-term to really saying number one priority after the safety of our employees is business continuity. And I think we've done a couple things. First of all, we've helped meet the extraordinary demand that we've had. Plus, I think we've also demonstrated the value of our group to the organization. If we just said, no, we want to only work on 5-year innovation things while the company and the world is going through this, that would have been completely inappropriate. So I think our ability to shift, refocus our talent where it is most needed has really benefited us.
Yeah, so this is Steve. I'll just jump in real quick and say, like Jeff, we had disaster recovery plans and enterprise risk management. I think the biggest shift for us is to make sure that those disaster recovery plans are more widely distributed. So the leaders of the sites, the leaders of our teams knew about them, but the general population really wasn't aware of what was inside our disaster recovery plans. And I think it's more people will be aware of what is going to happen and be able to provide insights to make those better plans moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Next question. We've been talking a lot about innovation and working with our customers and changes to markets and stuff. We haven't touched much on the changes to the financial systems that we're experiencing as well. So we've had mortgage markets being affected, our banking systems, financial systems being affected. How has changes to the financial markets affected your portfolio management, your decisions of what to go forward with and what not to go forward with?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I'll take a quick crack at an answer, which is that, it's hard for companies, when future earnings are really up in the air and at question, and when they see what's happening to the stock market on certain days, it's hard for them to still believe, as Jeff was alluding to, in the Horizon 2, Horizon 3 kind of work. I think right now a lot of companies are living in what we call Horizon 0.25, not even Horizon 1, but it's like a narrowed, a quarter of Horizon 1, and that's where all their focus is. So, that's just a start to an answer. Someone else may want to build on that.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
So for us, I don't know if it's influenced as much by the financial, and I'm not a global financial expert, but I know that in our world, the demand for our products is extraordinarily high right now. So how it's influencing the way we're fortunate. I mean, these are problems to have, and that people are in demand for our products. I know other industries and other companies are in a very different place and have a great deal of sadness for that. But in our case, the idea is to keep our plants open, to keep our production running, and to think about how we can meet short-term needs. So I think it's probably been less driven by financial and stock market, more driven by the day-to-day, what's happening with our consumers, what's happening with our retailers, and how we can best serve both of those constituents.
Yeah, so this is Steve. So I'm not a finance person, but I will share two things. One of the things we're able to do is because we have a strong balance sheet, and the market is, even though it's quite fluid right now, it is still from a lending perspective is positive. So we were able to shift funds around and make sure we were able to build up some critical inventory of our some of our raw materials and some of our incoming materials to make sure that we weren't interrupted by potentially one of our suppliers having a challenge due to COVID-19. And so that was probably the biggest shift, was we were able to have flexibility to move money around and make some changes in the short term to essentially mitigate potential impacts. And so we did that both to build up inventory, as well as to potentially, if we have to shut down a factory, to make sure we have enough cash flow to not have to furlough or let people go if we had to shut down a factory for a short period of time. So we were able to essentially leverage the volatility of the markets in a positive way for the short term. And again, for the benefit of the employees.
Yeah, I can add a couple of things. I almost similar conditions here. The more important thing for the companies becomes management of cash flow. Therefore, the cash is becoming more and more important. Therefore, either inventory or material or the final product, whatever, it should be liquidized easily. Therefore, there is a big pressure on the product side, because we have to define most sellable products more than ever. We need to spare our energy to focus on the quick movable SKUs that creates some management and agile decision making in the system. I'm not financial guy, therefore I'm looking from the product side, but this affects everything in the chain, financial chain. So we need daily decisions to make to keep our cash safe.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for questions and answers today. We're at the top of the hour. We'd like to thank our panelists, Cemil, Jeff, Steve, and Scott, and to all the webinar attendees for joining us and sharing in the conversation. We hope it was informative and useful, and we wish you all the best.
Yeah.
Thanks again to everyone, and please stay well.
Okay. I wish everyone, all attendees, a safe and healthy days. Take care of yourself. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
You. Thanks,
Thank you.
Andy. Thanks, Bob.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.